Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals, with my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We're on episode 536, although if you notice in our feed, we don't have episode 534. Going through some technical difficulties, might have to do some things with that. So episode 534 will come out of order, as we talked about in the third of our 4 draft preview shows. Talked about the defensive line, the interior defenders, the edge defenders, and cornerbacks. Well, this edition, the fourth and final, but actually is the third of 4, draft previews on the final 2 positions in the draft that we need to cover. We'll talk a little bit about specialists too, but we've got off-ball linebackers and we've got safety sets. So there's not I think, would it be safe to say that these might be the 2 weakest positions in the draft this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's some decent ones. I would say that safety and running back are probably the 2, worst is a strong word, but like you said, weakest.
Yeah.
And then from there, like you said, probably off-ball linebacker. Doesn't mean there aren't some good ones to know, especially as Cardinals fans. I mean, we do joke a lot about the linebackers and drafting a bunch of them, but it feels like there are a couple in this class that fit exactly what Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis want their defense to be, and they can be had on day 2, maybe even day 3, where they would be ideal fits.
Yeah, so let's talk about the linebackers, the collective favorite isn't the number 1 backer, isn't pretty much known as Peyton Wilson, and I guess both of these positions are positions where we should probably not expect anyone to be drafted in the first round for either position, probably.
Yeah, so I mean, you start with Peyton Wilson, and he's a guy that is a phenomenal player, but there are a couple huge things that are red flags. One, the first one being that he is already 24 years old, just turned 24, or will be 24 when the draft happens. He turns 24 on Monday, actually, so we're recording Thursday night. Or is it Sunday? I don't know, the 21st, whatever day that is. So he turns 24 on the 21st, which means he was a college freshman in 2018. Jess, so we didn't even know what COVID was by that point. And this is why I would say that his on-the-field work is probably consensus first linebacker, and then we're going to go over why he is likely to be a guy that goes on day 2, if not day 3. And that first thing is, in 2018, he missed the entire 2018 season, his freshman year, because he injured his knee during summer and had to have surgery. In 2020, he had a nagging shoulder injury, dealt with some concussion issues. No big deal. Didn't miss any time. I think he missed 2 games. He missed 2 games. 2021, so what should have been his senior season, he missed the final 10 games because he had to have surgery on that shoulder. 2022, he only played in 11 games, was honorable mention all ACC, but missed 2 games with a shoulder injury again. And then in 2023, he put together a full season for the first time in his collegiate career. and was phenomenal. Everything we kind of expected him to be, dating back to 2020 when he was a redshirt sophomore and was first team All ACC. He was a unanimous All American, first team All ACC, won the Buckus Award, which is for the top linebacker of the country. He finished with 138 tackles, including 17 and a half tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 9 passes defensed, and 3 interceptions. I mean, he is legitimately a freak of nature on the field. Prototypical size, just under a shade under 6'4", 235, with incredible athleticism, 4'4", 340, 9'11" broad jump, a 4'2" short shuttle, and a 6'8", 3 cone. He is a complete and utter freak of nature who has the knees and shoulders of you, Jess. And that is
that's not good.
And that is where things come from. So he so people understand kind of the timeline. He blew out his knee in 2017 and was rehabbing it and had to, and I'm assuming all it says is re-injured and had to have surgery again. I'm assuming he blew it out again. I mean, that's what why else would you miss an entire year and have to have surgery again, right? So two knee surgeries and then 2 shoulder surgeries. That just like it would be for
were it
a
only
running
the
back,
knee injuries.
Yeah.
Were it only the knee injuries, that would be a minor red flag, especially if you saw them come back fully and play the way he did this past season. But at shoulder, and if you said on previous shows, is a linebacker with questionable shoulders means you're not going to get much from him.
Yeah. So here's the thing with Peyton Wilson. He becomes an intriguing prospect at 66 or 71. He becomes a really hard guy to pass up at 90.
Yeah.
But anything before 90, you really have to weigh the pros and the cons of what you're looking at here, because you are looking at a legitimate, and I don't say this as hyperbole, a legitimate like guy in the mold of these guys like Dre Greenlaw, Fred Warner. Like, that is how he plays the game. He is that good. But it is really hard to draft a guy that's 24 and has had 4 surgeries already. Like, well, and like you said, and it's not like it's like a wrist, a shoulder, an elbow, and a knee. It's like 2 shoulder, 2 knees. Like, those are incredibly important.
Or they're all fixed, so they've already been hurt.
Right,
now.
Exactly.
And
and the weird one is so the one that he had to have. So yeah, so I'm rereading everything right now. So ACL in right knee, re-injured it in 2018, have to have it again. So blew out the right knee twice. He had to have both. Crazy. So he's had 3 shoulder surgeries technically, because he's had microscopic surgery on both shoulders in 2022. And then in 2021, he had to have a very odd procedure where his shoulder blade continued to dislocate, and he had to have a surgery to repair that to make sure it didn't happen anymore. So 3 shoulder surgeries, 2 knee surgery. Like again, I it's a joke, but it's not like this guy has had as many surgeries as like a 50, 60-year-old. Like, it's not normal. So that's what the problem is. So I think the guy that goes first in this draft is Edgerrin Cooper.
Okay. And he's largely a round 2 guy.
Yeah, day 2, probably round 2, probably top 50. And he's been really good, man. I mean, Edgerrin came in 6'2", 230, kind of that prototypical size now that we're seeing from these backers with their athleticism. Tested like a freak. He's got super long arms. So Peyton Wilson has not long arms, 30 and a half inch arms at 6'4" with a 75 and 3/4 inch wingspan. Cooper is 6'2". He has 34-inch arms and an 80 and a 4th inch wingspan, so a 5-inch longer wingspan on a body that's 2 inches shorter. So, and he ran a 4.51, had a 10-inch broad jump or 10-foot broad jump, 4.27, not as good of a 3-cone at 7.2, but plenty good enough.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that he's a little reckless, and that's why he's a day 2 guy, but he's explosive. He can run, he can cover, and you'd rather a guy that you have to bridle back than rather get to go forward. And what we mean by that is
Bruce Arians used to say it's like you'd rather tell a guy whoa than sick him, because that you got the right mentality. It's easier to pull him back than it is to motivate someone to be more intense.
So he's another one. He'll be 23 this year. So again, I think we're kind of getting to the point where all these guys are older now. You're not getting a ton of 20, 21-year-olds entering the draft. So you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. So, here's the thing. He's going to go before the Cardinals pick at 66. And in my opinion, he's not worth the 35th pick.
Right.
So if you get a trade back, so I saw an interesting one today. I think it was by CBS Sports. If I am wrong, I apologize, but I am fairly certain it was CBS Sports. And the Cardinals traded back with the New England Patriots, I want to say. And they got from 27 to 34 and 68, I want to say it was. Or it was, I have to double check. And so they had 34 and 35. So again, you're probably not going to want to take Cooper in that range, but that gives you a little more freedom, right, to make a move if you need to. But yeah, so that's number 2. Number 3, it starts to become a question mark or a debate. Like, who do you like? Some people like Jeremiah Trotter, the Clemson linebacker. Yes, the same Jeremiah Trotter as his name as his father, who played in the NFL forever. Just built completely different. This Jeremiah Trotter, 6 foot, 230 pounds. That Jeremiah Trotter was 6'4" and 260 pounds. But this one is incredibly instinctive, and that's something I think that the Cardinals linebackers have lacked coming out. I remember having the conversation about Isaiah Simmons and our concerns about, asking him to be a linebacker, saying
going all the way back to Hassan Reddick.
Right, to Hassan Reddick, yeah. And then even as recently as Zaven Collins, and talking about he played in a gimmick defense. Like a 3-3-5 is just not something that the NFL plays a lot of, and he kind of had free reign to do different things. And so when you look at what Trotter has done and does, incredibly instinctive. He is one of those guys that, despite his size at 230, he's a come down and hit people in the face type of guy. And he really reminds me of a guy that was just a productive menace in Jonathan Gannon's defense in Philly, and that's TJ Edwards. Similar build, similar play style. I think he's a guy that if you could get, and they're talking about him in late round 3, early round 4, that would be kind of an ideal area for him, right? Because you're talking about a guy that you get at 90 or 105 that can come in and potentially start right away, be a every down guy. From there, you got the Michigan and Ohio State guys, Junior Colson. Again, I love all of these Michigan guys, but they're getting to the point now where you kind of want to see them outside of their phenomenal defensive scheme, right? And he is he is a hammer. I mean, this dude loves to come downhill, loves to hit. There won't be any questions about the interior run game anymore. And he has good athleticism. He did not work out, but he shows good athleticism on tape. He looks like a starting Mike backer in the NFL from day one. Again, but you want to see these guys outside of that framework of an elite defense. Tommy Eichenberg, he's another one in the same range as Trotter, right? Round 3, 4, late round 3, early round 4. Colson's probably going to go round 2 or 3, though, by the way. I should have mentioned that. Eichenberg is a guy that he put up just insane numbers in 2022. And a lot of people thought he would leave last year. 120 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 4 passes defense, 1 interception. And then he just, was like a lot of Ohio State guys this year where they just kind of never reached that potential that you were expecting. Eichenberg is a guy that missed 3 games this year with an elbow injury. Still was first team All Big Ten. Was actually second team All American. I didn't think he played as well this year as he did last year. But if you go back to last year, he's a guy that understands his job as a middle backer. He's not as football physical as like Colson was, or as much of a shot out of the cannon type of guy, like a Jeremiah Trotter, but he is a guy that is going to always be around the football, understand what his job is, and make plays consistently. Again, this guy ended up being a lot better than where he was drafted, so I don't want this to be like a hard comparison, but a guy like Matt Milano coming out of Boston College a couple of years ago, and Milano's turned into one of the better linebackers in the NFL. Similar build, similar athletic testing, similar makeup in their games. I think that's a really, really high-end projection, so I don't want anybody to think I'm saying that's what Eichenberg's going to be, but it's that type of player I could see, because they have like I said, when you look at Milano, there's not a 6 foot 223, a 4.6 740. His broad jump was elite, but outside of that, nothing stood out. Eichenberg's kind of the same way, 6'2", 233. Really played well, though, and had a lot of productivity. There's a couple other guys that we can mention. Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky. Kentucky's churned out some really talented linebackers the last couple of years, right? Even Jamin Davis got drafted in the first round by the Washington Commander Skins the other year. And he came out 6'1", 237, ran a 4.5 40 with a 10.7 broad jump. So super athletic. Didn't do any 3-cone testing, so we don't have that information. But when you watch him play, Wallace is that type of guy that, again, kind of that shot out of the cannon type of guy. Like you want him going forward and going downhill. He had 80 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks on a bad Kentucky team this year. And he actually looked like a good athletic player. I think he's going to end up in round 3. So again, in that 90 to 105 range, he would be a guy that would fit. And then Cedric Gray out of North Carolina, probably the most productive non-Peyton Wilson guy. The last 3 years have been kind of nutty for him. He was 100 tackles, 145 tackles, 121 tackles. The last 2 years, 12 tackles for loss and 11 tackles for loss. This year, he did a little more. He had 5 sacks as well. And then you look at his work as a pass defender: 5 passes defense, 2 interceptions sophomore year, 8 and 2 last year, and then 5 and 1 this year. And he's a true senior. He'll be 22 in October, so he's like a legit 4th year guy. But he's athletic. He understands the game. He makes plays at all levels of the field, and he's going to be a key special teamer, which makes him, a really interesting guy. The rub on him is that he's not a burner, so he doesn't have the eye-popping numbers that some of these other guys have.
Well, isn't that kind of the knock on this class, is that we don't
Yeah.
have the elite testing times that we've had in previous years,
Right.
outside of Wilson, really.
Right. Outside of Wilson, really. I mean, you had some guys that did some things. I mean, Jordan McGee ran a 4.5 and had a 6.93 cone, which isn't bad. The kid out of Washington, Olafoshio, I can't pronounce his first name, Edafun, Olafoshio, he had a 10.8 broad to 39.5-inch vert, so like jumps out of the building. And 4.56 is still great, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't, he's 6 foot and 235, like he's a smaller guy. So yeah, it's just a different type of class than we've had in the past couple of seasons.
And outside of that, so are there any late, like the Cardinals like to go, at least what we saw last year from Monty Austin Ford, when they went late round guys, they were high in athleticism, and like an Owen Papo, crazy freak, literally a freak, kind of like Peyton Wilson. I don't like.
There's not that this year. There are a couple intriguing guys. Maris Leofa from Notre Dame, 6'2", 234. So nothing like that really stands out. But remember what we talked about with Ezra Cooper. He's the same way. He's the pterodactyl, man. Long arms, 34 and a quarter-inch arms, almost an 80-inch wingspan. And he had good jumps, or a good broad jump, and his 40 was decent, but like those arms and that play style, that's an intriguing fit for coaches when you're talking about a guy that is that length at 6'2". But like you said, the athletic freak, there really isn't one this year that you just like, you got to have this guy that you've got to, I mean, if you want a guy with cool names, Steel Chambers from Ohio State, but like,
well,
yeah, like you said, this
year, the Cardinals
linebacker
are kind
class,
of in a good place because, well, they drafted Papo last year. They still got Kaiser. They brought back Chris Barnes, and they added Mac Wilson. And so it's a position, well, for one, it doesn't seem to be, it's not a premium position for what they do. And so it turns out it kind of looks like they could piecemeal this. Like if there's not someone they absolutely love, that this might be the position that might go unaddressed with those 11 picks, especially if they end up doubling up at other positions. I could see it isn't kind of the safety position like that. So let's move on then. Coming up next on the Rise of Secret podcast, special Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about the safety class. Any guys that the Cardinals might have a look at some point. That's coming up next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, special Cardinals talk on the web. Now moving on to the safety position. Isn't it kind of the same rub that the safeties have, is that seems to be an absence of the freaks this year. The testing numbers that you got, they're not bad. They're fine. But unless you're going to consider Cooper DeJean as a safety, the athletic traits of the athleticism are lackluster in terms of you've got Dadron Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech with the 4.41 and the 38-inch vert, 10'3" broad. But he's also considered a top 50 player by some. He made Doug Farrar's top 50 on his big board. And then you've got the 4.47 ran by Javon Bullard. Those are, based on Farrar's list, those are the two safeties that you look at as top 50 guys. Is there anyone else that you would consider, even not necessarily round 2, but on day 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy that's going to be the most intriguing is Jaden Hicks out of Washington State. So he definitely didn't test as well as the two you mentioned. But this is the thing with him. And so here's what I'll say. He does have borderline elite jumps. He was a 10.2 broad and I think a 38-inch vertical. So he's in the, that 75, 80th percentile. But here's the thing with him that makes him really intriguing. He's 6'2" and 215 pounds. And he ran a 4.5, and then those jumps that he had. So he is built more similar to um, like small outside linebacker than he is a safety, especially like you mentioned, these other guys who, like you said, blew away the combine, but weren't nearly as they're not as big. So that's the one thing. He's a guy, he Hicks works really well, and he kind of reminds me of Jalen Thompson a little bit. He works really well either going forward or going backwards, so he can play as a strong or a free. And he looks like a guy that'll contribute on special teams. The last 2 years at Washington State, again, a guy that's playing a lot of safety. He had 7 passes defensed in 22 and 1 interception, and 6 passes defense and 2 interceptions this year. He was a honorable mention all Pac-12 this year, which kind of tells you how the voting goes in the Pac-12, right? But he's a guy that I think could be intriguing, but again, I wouldn't mess with him on day 2, and I think he's going to go on or in round 2, and I think that's where he goes. You mentioned Bullard. Similar to how I feel about these Michigan guys, I love Bullard's makeup. I love everything he does. 5'10", 198, so call it 200 pounds. 4.47. Had a great short shuttle at 3.97. So anything under 4 is considered elite. So moves well, but I want to get these guys out of the Georgia scheme, right, and see really how they fare on that, by themselves and what they can do. The issue with Bullard is a little. So I guess I should have said this about Hicks. So Hicks has a 76 and a quarter inch wingspan. Bullard's 73 and 5/8. So it's one of those things where you're like, is he long enough to be a consistent guy in coverage? I think he's a guy that can be used. I just think he's similar to Buddha, but just not as
not
as much. Yeah. I mean, that's the best way to put it, Jess. I don't want to be disrespectful to guys, but like
well,
they play.
In fairness, Buddha's really good.
Right, so. Exactly. Tyler Newbin was a guy that was getting first round buzz coming into the year because he is such a productive safety. Again, safeties, we don't expect to have that, one hand on ball per game. And Tyler Newbin the last 2 years did just that. 7 passes defense, 4 interceptions. This year, 9 passes defense, 5 interceptions, so 14. Second team All-American. He is a guy that probably, it's tough with him because he is a guy that is really good in coverage, and is really good against the run, but his goodness in coverage comes from being in favorable roles. What I mean by that is he needs to be in a scheme where he's playing in a 2-high system, and he's able to just concentrate on his quarter or half of the field. I don't know if he's a guy you want to move around like a Javon Bullard or a Jaden Hicks. So if you're looking for a guy that's going to play more of a traditional safety role, and we haven't seen that in Arizona in a while, right? Like Rashad Johnson was kind of really the last one. After that, it's always been these really great hybrid guys, starting with Tyrann Mathieu, Tony Jefferson, those guys all playing that role. Newbin's kind of a throwback, and so we'll see what they want and how they deal with him. But again, another guy, right, that you're looking at in that, 66 range, right, at the earliest. Cole Bishop out of Utah, a guy that's been a thorn in the side of the Sun Devils for years, right? He's an incredibly talented player, but he has very short arms, and he playing in that scheme and for Kyle Whittingham, who's one of the best coaches in my opinion in all of college football. He wants to take advantage of the fact that he's able to come downhill and be a box safety and make plays consistently. This year was a little bit better, 5 passes defense, 2 interceptions, but in his career, in 3 years, he only has 14 passes defense and 3 interceptions. He's not as good in coverage. And I know it's not as important for safeties, but when you're talking about a guy that has more tackles for losses than passes defense and interceptions, like you see how they utilize him. And at 6'2", 206, he's not the size of like a Jaden Hicks. He's leaner. He did have a decent combine, really good 40, good vertical jump. So he's explosive, and he's a guy that is going to start in the NFL. But again, he's a Buda Baker type of guy, right? He's got to be playing down, playing robber in the box near the line of scrimmage. You're not going to have him sitting over the top. From there, it just becomes a pick your preference type. I mean, there are people that still like Cameron Kitchens, the kid out of Miami.
Well, Jalen Simpson, he adds a little extra, 39.5-inch vert, 11'1", so what was it? So 123, 133-inch broad to go with this 4.45. But no, he's a small. He's built kind of like a corner at 5'11", 180.
And he's a ball hawk. That's the crazy thing. He's like a coverage guy, but you can't have him on the field to defend the run, man. I mean, he's just small. You mentioned DTD from Texas Tech, right? 5'10", 200 pounds. Ultra productive his final 3 years. I mean, just ultra productive. 13 pass defense, 3 interceptions, 8 and 3, and then 12 and 4. Really good numbers. And he's smooth, man. That's the one thing with him. But he's aggressive and explosive. And you see him as a guy that can play similar to what we talked about with Newbin, just a different style. And he is super athletic. I really like him as a guy that you might be able to take as more of your traditional back end safety. But he is a lot of fun, man. He's a good ball player. And I think he is a guy that's going to get, he is so athletic that you just wonder where he fits into everything in this draft. A guy that's been gaining some steam, Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest. It's interesting because he comped out really closely athletically and size-wise like Jordan Whitehead, who's ended up being a really high-end safety in the league. And so I think that's kind of the way people are like looking at things now. They're getting these guys in round 4, round 5, and then they're trying to find archetypes that are similar to them. And that's what Mustafa is. He hasn't been ultra productive, but he will be able to play special teams early and then find the field. And that makes him a good, day 3 type of guy. And I've seen him now making it into the top 100 in draft boards and things like that. So, like I said, when they find these archetypes like Whitehead, who went in round 4, what they end up doing is they end up, trying to get that guy and then taking them around earlier. And I think that's where mistakes come in, right? Because like you said, it's tough to replicate the atmosphere that somebody came in and played well in and have him succeed. And remember, Whitehead went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Bruce Arians Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? Well, actually, he was drafted by Cutter, sorry. But then the Bruce Arians, Todd Bowles Buccaneers were his second year. And remember how good Todd Bowles is with safeties, right? And so I just feel like sometimes people get overly enthusiastic about those things. So yeah, if he ends up in Tampa, you're going to be like, why didn't we draft him earlier? But if he ends up in, a team like LA or with the Rams or things like that that haven't developed safeties really well, you might be saying like, oh, why'd you take him in round 3 type stuff? So it's an interesting class for sure. I mean, you've got a couple intriguing guys late, like you always do. And those guys tend to have to be a really good special teamer, right? The first one, Tyke Smith out of Georgia, he came in at 5'10", 200 pounds, ran a 4.46, good vertical, good broad jump. And he's been a key special teamer at Georgia for a long time. So it's one of those situations where you look at it and you go, oh yeah, this is a guy that I know I can draft in round 5 or round 6 and will make my roster for the next 4 years. He'll be a guy because he'll be an immediate impact player on special teams. I think, yeah, he had over 400 career special team snaps for Georgia. So like this is a dude that relishes the role and things like that. And then the other one, I'm trying to get through my notes here. Hold on one second. The other one was Mark Perry. That's who it was. He was the athlete from TCU. He was not invited to the combine. I don't know why. Typically, when they're not invited, they usually either have an off-field issue, right, or a guy that just didn't get enough snaps. But 6 foot 213 and ran a 4.4 flat with 37-inch vertical and a 10.11 broad. So like at 213, he's a super athletic guy. And again, we're talking about guys in rounds 5+ where you're saying like, hey, this can be a key special teams player for the next 4 seasons. Those are guys that are just super important. And what you're looking for on day 3, because like we say, those day 3 picks are kind of lottery tickets, right?
Yeah. In terms of
sorry, real quick, I should mention one guy that's gotten some buzz lately, Trey Taylor. And the reason I'm mentioning him is because you just don't see guys get drafted from here very often, but from Air Force, 6'1", 206, didn't test overly well at his pro day. I mean, 4.6 is fine, 37.5-inch vert and 10.3 broad, but he ran a 6.93 cone. And he's going to become a guy that is kind of a big safety back there. Not a guy that is going to be like despite his size, he's not a guy that comes up and makes plays in the run game. So that's what's tough for him. But he was a first team All-American, man. So like he is a intriguing prospect. And like I said, it's just one of those things that you rarely see guys out of Air Force get drafted. So it'd be kind of cool to see that.
Yeah. Specialists, like, I had Austin McNamara on the show, a punter from around here. Really good. Is there any specialist that would be worth a draft pick this year?
I doubt it, but did they re-sign Brewer already?
They did.
Right?
They did.
Okay. Yeah, the kid out of Wisconsin's supposed to be really good, the long snapper. And then the Alabama kid has been like nails his entire career, the kicker. But, outside of that, I don't think that there's anything worth.
We said the same thing about Moody last year, and he had a very up and down rookie year.
Yeah.
He was he was a lock. And then the Niners took him in the third round.
Well, that's the thing. So the thing with these kickers and long snappers or whatever, if you're gonna draft one, don't do it until like the seventh round. Like, just get ahead of the priority free agent.
Yeah.
Like, these guys that draft them in the third round, I think it almost puts like too much pressure on these guys. And then, Zane Gonzalez, the kid out of Florida State, Robert Aguayo, right? Like, it just puts too much pressure on these guys, and then they can't, because they live and die on every kick. You need to have that Sebastian Janikowski, like, smoke a cigarette and go kick a field goal mentality, and it doesn't matter because you'll just go do it the next time, right? And these guys nowadays don't have it. You mentioned McNamara. The crazy thing about McNamara is obviously he's 6'5", so he's a big dude. But the kid out of BYU, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, Ryan Recco, came in at 6'4", but is 235. So he's a thick boy punting back there.
yeah. I do remember watching him, but McNamara great, but like obviously you root for all those guys. It's just hard to get. It's hard to crack the rotation, especially when, But
well, and we do have to mention the Mizzou kicker, because anybody that's 5'11", 240 and kicking, you have to cheer for, right? Just
that's basically
that's
that's a little bigger than me.
But that's like the middle-aged guy, right? You're like, all right, if you got a middle-aged body as a 22, 23-year-old, I'm going to root for you, man. Because, like, you just don't see guys. I mean, you look at the rest of the kickers, and they're all, like, right around 200 pounds. He's 241.
Yeah.
Like, that's at 5'11". Like, that's crazy.
All right, with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Again, episode 536. That wraps up our draft preview, except for the episode 534, which we will either have to re-record or I have to do some work to make it sound decent, but we'll get that out to you. Next show that was scheduled will be next week when we mock the first round of the draft, and then it'll be draft time. Seth, thanks as always for the time. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.